The next thing is in terms of the FDI. If you see, FDI has been one of the key cornerstones of India's economic growth
Yes.
ever since 1991, Manmohan Singh's reforms, etc.
Yeah.
That has been the cornerstone. But when we see the recent periods, there is actually a lot of FDI going out of the country. Also, a lot of uh, fund flows going out. Whether it could be Hyundai getting listed and taking out the money, or even others, companies, Indian domestic companies also setting up projects out overseas. Do you think this is a long-term trend, structural trend, wherein a lot of India's capital could, find its way outside? Because India certainly in this current stage needs a lot of capital,
Yes.
and in the scenario, if there is a capital outflow, I think that's not really very encouraging for the economic growth.
You're right, Sachin, absolutely on this count. And that's where I think some rethinking is happening in the minds of the government as well. Uh, One of the key facets of the earlier FDI flow also was that we had significant investments coming from China also, right?
Correct.
In various sectors, especially on the manufacturing side. Now, having the kind of strained relations that we had with them, the government had to take a certain decision at that point in time. We are recalibrating that relationship, perhaps.
Mm.
Maybe the future trajectory of that could be having an impact in terms of how these things can potentially play out. It is also the case where we'll also have to be cognizant about how the global dynamics are going to play, because there is a consistent, I would say, grouping of the economies which is happening, right?
Mm.
So friend shoring, near shoring of their essential requirements, how that can play out, and we'll have to keep a very close vigil in terms of how these aspects could be impacting the sectors where especially we have some kind of a competitive advantage, and
Correct.
how to scale it up, and in the
Mm.
sectors where we do not have that kind of a competitive advantage,
Mm.
how to build that up.
Mm.
Meaning thereby what would happen is that what could potentially be a weaker consumption demand on the domestic side,
Right.
how are we going to circumvent it from a greater export driven demand, right?
Correct.
Again, it's not an easy thing, primarily because as you were mentioning, I mean, there has been heavy dumping which is happening from China, right?
Right.
We'll have to necessarily select in terms of the right geographies where we can potentially forge those kind of business partnerships, right?
Correct.
And ensure that the interests of our economic giants, I mean, they are taken care of, and we are in a position to circumvent that, and
Correct.
ensure that. I think the world has moved in such a way that I think about 2 decades back, one would easily have conjectured that if at around 75-76% of the utilization levels across the industry, immediately the private sector capex
Capex
starts,
should
right?
happen. Yeah.
It has not
Not
happened,
happen. Yeah.
right? So that means certain variable which is there has changed, and that variable, to my mind, is how the kind of opaque economies like China they are behaving. 2 decades back, it was an out and out conjecture that they would be behaving in this way, because their own economy is also quite strained today,
Correct.
right? There are a
Correct.
lot of stress over there. So how
Right.
they would be determining in terms of this output, that would be ensuring that how the other economies also they start responding. And then we have Donald Trump administration coming, right, from today onwards, right?
Correct.
So how a combination of this aspect, it's a question where economic diplomacy takes precedence over every single aspect of the
Yeah.
functioning, right?
Yeah.
That's where I think the answers would be lying, and
Yeah.
we'll have to be absolutely vigilant in
Yeah.
terms of where our interests
Yeah.
lie, how we are going to exploit that.
Yeah, and we will come to the protectionism, because all of this will lead to protectionism. But before that, on this point, one more challenge which India, I mean FDI into India, we may face is earlier it was we were competing mostly against China,
Yeah.
but now if you see America, rather US, they want to be the big
Yes.
manufacturing giant. They
Yeah.
want to kind of manufacture more and more stuff in house so that
Right.
they get more jobs, and that I don't think will be very good for India, because then some of the products that we may be exporting now US may be making on its own. So to
Correct.
that extent, that capital flow, instead of coming to India, may remain in US itself.
Right.
So that's the added challenge. Let's come to infrastructure.
Yeah.
Infrastructure in a lot of ways has been the key driver of our economic
Right.
growth for last many years. Road sector, airports, ports, renewable energy, they have been some of the
Yeah.
big drivers. Now we see at some level there is a plateauing of this investment, because while the government is looking at 10-11 lakh crores, but it's not really easy to really spend that money in a meaningful manner,
Right.
and kind of create the required impetus. What do you think? What is next for infrastructure sector from an Indian context, as per you?
I think, see, the focus of the government on energy, especially on the renewable side, and then on roads, consistently ensuring that we have the best of the logistical
Right.
networks getting created through the NIP declaration and everything, urban development, right? All this, and of course, modernization of the railways, right?
Correct.
And this has been the heavy focus on the infrastructure sector. I do not think that there is likely to be any significant change as far as the focus on these four critical aspects of infrastructure sector is concerned. What I feel is that in order to differentiate ourselves as compared to many of the emerging economies, if the focus, and which I believe is likely to be, if we differentiate ourselves into kind of a sustainable growth of the infrastructure sector through a heavy investment which is taking place, I think that would be giving the flip in terms of attracting the foreign capital also, because the global investors, they are looking in terms of the sustainability aspect very intensely, right?
Right.
So if our focus remains on that, and that would be creating in terms of, say, a greater EV infrastructure, right?
Correct.
uh, Use of more and more sustainable aspects in terms of say the energy sector or road sector, how we are able to differentiate our infrastructure growth and our infrastructure investment vis-a-vis the other emerging economies, I think then we can redirect the bulk of the investment coming our way, which potentially could be differentiating, taking or rather catapulting us to a different level. I think the government has its eyes set on this, because it has set itself very ambitious targets on the net zero by 2070. Significant, I think, investment which is already happening on the renewable sector, 500
Right.
gigawatts by say 2030 on, right?
Correct.
We appear to be on track, right? 125 gigawatt is already there, plus further capacities are in the offing.
Correct.
I believe that the thought process is there to differentiate our infrastructure growth as compared to the others, and in the way keep on attracting the global capital.
Yeah. I think very rightly said, and I think one of the biggest issue which faced the infrastructure sector about 10-15 years back was in terms of the regulation.
Yes.
And I think there the government has taken a lot of action. We've learned it, maybe we had some bit of accidents with some defaults, etc., in power and road. But now if you see the new infrastructure projects, most of them are kind of going smoothly in terms of their timelines, in terms of no major cost escalations, etc.
Right.
So in that sense, I think we overall, the banking system, the governments, the sponsors, they have understood.
Right.
One area where I felt infrastructure which we have missed out and which can be a focus area is the urban. You mentioned that urban development, but in terms of more taking the ownership of the city, somewhere I think it falls between the center and the city, center and the state. Sorry, because center is obviously looking at areas which are under them, right? So railways, roads, they are under national or other union list, whereas some of the others like power, which are under both. So there we have more challenges, but still we have covered a lot of distance. But cities very clearly fall in the state.
Correct.
And states are perennially not that cash surplus. They have limitations. So I think somewhere I felt that in this budget there should be a focus to have a development of at least say top 8-10 cities, because those are the first things that international investors, when they come, and they look at. So if we can really at least, and that is where I think China took a lead in kind of making those world class cities in Shanghai and Shenzhen and all that. So I think that is something maybe if the government takes notice of and kind of invest in a big way.
Just a bit on that, and you mentioned rightly on the urban side, I think, see, there again is a growing realization on the part of the administration in the various urban local bodies also is concerned. As a rating agency, you are privy to the fact that we rated one of the first issues on the green financing, right? By Indore Municipal Corporation. I mean, specifically oriented towards the renewable project supplying to the developmental authority. So from that angle, I think there would be a greater recognition of this aspect. We could potentially be witnessing more urban local bodies going towards that route. Perhaps some more fillip which could be given from the policy making side to make it more attractive, right? The government can think in terms of ways and means for that. But if that could happen, we can see a greater congruence of the efforts of the center and the state,
Correct.
in terms of ensuring that thing.
Yeah. Let's come to